Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome everybody again to another episode of our show. Today, bringing you another really awesome guest involved in creating a better tomorrow for all of us. Today, we have the honor of being joined by Kaushik Gune, who is head of healthcare for the United States for Huma, which is a global digital health technology company that's involved in using artificial intelligence to advance a digital-first care delivery and research model, ultimately allowing people to live longer, fuller lives. Huma's regulated software as a medical device is the only disease-agnostic platform. They hold both European Union medical device regulation Class 2B status and US FDA Class 2 regulatory status, and has pretty broad applications, including areas like running virtual clinical trials, the development of companion apps to help support patients in various therapies and drug treatments, and ultimately, as we'll be getting into, sort of this really interesting digital-first model broadly for primary health systems. Kaushik has over 20 years of operational, financial, and strategic experience in various companies, including McKinsey, NuVasive, United Airlines. Before he joined Huma, he was responsible for building Smith+Nephew's digital health business in the musculoskeletal space. Kaushik comes to us with an undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering from University of Mumbai, master's in industrial engineering from Purdue, and MBA from INSEAD. A lot of really interesting topics to get into today. Kaushik Gune, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation. It's a very important conversation, not only for our company, but also me personally. I honestly believe that, technology has a huge role to play in, transforming our US healthcare system, which desperately needs help. And so the potential is there. Right. But it now comes down to individual responsibilities to, achieve that potential. So really excited to talk about, the good, the challenges. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Most definitely. Before we get into everything that's going on in Huma, Kaushik, take a couple of minutes just to talk a little bit more about yourself, because you've had a pretty fascinating journey the last 20 years, consulting, aerospace, medical devices. Talk a little bit about your background and how what you've been up to, and ultimately how you sort of found the sweet spot in health the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, I should say it was a planned journey. It was a very thoughtful, structured career plan. But I'd be lying, there were opportunities presented to me that, I couldn't have imagined. But one thing, I always wanted to do when I first chose, engineering as an Indian growing up in the 90s. You only had two options to, make something worthwhile out of yourself. One is either do engineering or do, become a doctor. And I still remember the reason I chose engineering was because I wanted to do multiple different things. As a doctor, typically you will, specialize in something. Either it's a primary care or it's a, specialty care. You typically specialize in something, and you typically kind of stay in one location because you're catering to that community. And so simple, just a simple thought of like, no, I want to, go around the world. I want to, try different things. I want to do different things. So that has, always drove me. And as such, you see, my career started in airline operations, did a bunch of different operating roles. And then I said, I want to do, more of strategy and finance, and which is why, life led me to McKinsey. And then after that, I did take up, a couple of financial roles. I was doing, corporate finance without any, CPA or type of, degree. But what all of that did was it actually really equipped me as a general business person, general manager or something like that. And that has really helped me in my last 3 experiences. One was a co-founder type of role with another person who had founded the company. I had joined him. It was in fertility diagnostics. We scaled that company from 0 to like 50 mil ARR. And when you're in that kind of phase, you need your finance, you need your operations, you need marketing, everything to come serve you. So in a way, my first 15 years have helped and shaped my past 5 years, and made me a better business person, better leader, better colleague to my team members. Similarly at Huma, my responsibility spans for the US business. I look after sales, marketing, product development, product delivery. We also have a clinical team that does the monitoring on behalf of our customers. So I do have a diverse set of responsibilities, and I still keep challenging myself on the scale of diversity. I do want to do more interesting things, more different things that I've never ever done. So we'll see what the next few years have unfold. Certainly taking on US healthcare, the challenge of transforming US healthcare is quite big and quite diverse. So we're doing one thing at a time. So
Excellent, really excellent. And Kaushik, before we get into sort of everything that's going on at Huma, I would like to just talk a little bit about this theme, which we'll be touching on sort of in the different sub areas, and that is this concept of digital first. Obviously, we've seen amazing changes in the U.S. healthcare system over the years, from obviously a physical model to one where sort of these digital tools are creeping in all aspects. What does it mean to be digital first?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of ways I look at it. If we broadly split, people into 2 categories, right? People who are sick and people who are healthy. People who are sick are the ones we typically talk about, right? They need healthcare. They need, attention. And if you look at those people, they only get care when they are in a hospital, or when they are in a clinic, or when they are in a, primary care kind of office. And you ask, what does that mean? What's that care, right? And it's typically running diagnostics, doing checkups, getting treatments, getting suggestions. But then once you're out of the clinic, which by the way is 99% of that sick person's time, what happens, right? All of a sudden, we don't think of that as healthcare for some reason. If you ask a doctor, The doctor is, I have 20 appointments in my day and I want to make sure I'm back to back to back and I'm paying attention and I'm taking care of my patients. But the doctor never says, I'm taking care of my patients when they are at home, right? The doctor's mindset is, I'm going to take care when the patient is in front of me in my clinic, make sure, diagnostics is done, make sure I'm reading their charts properly and all that. So in my mind, that's the change of mindset and change of definition. So when somebody says digital first, I think, I don't know, I can't speak for the world, but how I interpret is, hey, let's start delivering care outside the clinic when the patient is not in front of the doctor. In front of the doctor, we all know that's great, right? Like US has great doctors, great quality of doctors. Unfortunately, they can't be in front of the patients that they need to be or the patients need. So now if we start thinking about, okay, so what can we do when the patients are outside, right? And oh, by the way, most doctors will, agree with this, that the biggest issue with the care delivery is the patients not following, the treatment that is given to them when they are outside of the clinic, right? When they are inside of the clinic, care delivery is great. Adherence to that care delivery is great when they are inside of the hospital. It's all the problem is when they're outside of the clinic, right? So we have a situation where 99% of the sick person's time is outside of the clinic. We know that is where care delivery falls significantly shorter. We know that is where disease gets progressed, more complications happen, so on and so forth. So how can we use technology, use innovative processes and procedures to start delivering care outside the clinic? This is not about, hey, let's move care from in clinic to outside the clinic, right? This is not about, hey, let's save money, let's reduce on the spend that we have in clinic. It's more about it's more about let's start delivering care where there is a gap of care right now and where care is required. And if we deliver care there, great things will happen. Costs will come down, people will be more healthy, so on and so forth. So that's how I see, on a broad basis. And then you get into, okay, then what can we do, right? Well, can we measure something better? Yes, we have tons of technology, we have tons of wearables, we have tons of at home kind of equipments. Well, can we track something? Can we detect something? Can we guide the patient? Can we encourage the patient to stay on, so on and so forth? So it just opens up a whole different kind of set of things you can do if you say that, hey, I'm going to switch and I'm going to start delivering 90% of care outside of the clinic.
Excellent. And the core tool that the Huma has created for this model is something you refer to as a configurable software as a medical device, or SAMD, disease management platform. As I mentioned in the bio of the show, EU and FDA cleared. Walk us through a little bit of the history. I know Huma's been around for a few years. Take us a little to sort of the development of this particular software, and just I had my, in past careers, I've been at FDA with drug products. I know, there's digital health products and so forth that are making their way through the agency now. Give us a little bit of the story of what it's like to bring a software to FDA as a medical device and how that all worked.
Yeah. No, I think if you look at kind of Huma's history, we started in the rare diseases. And the reason to start in the rare disease was simple. Pharma companies and doctors had, when you're treating rare disease, every disease and every patient is very different. And at best, throughout the world, you may get 100 patients, right? Or 1,000 patients. So inherently, by the definition of that, there is lack of data and lack of understanding of the patient and the disease. And as such, all pharma companies, all doctors were interested in collecting as much data as possible, not just when the person is in clinic. So that is where really this concept of digital first started, and you can imagine why. Right? There was just an appetite. Back then, digital first was not the buzzword. There was no reimbursement for it. Pharma and the doctors were just interested in doing good. And so we started, experimenting with, let's monitor a bunch of stuff, right? Let's ask the doctors, let's ask the pharma companies what stuff, if we monitor, would be helpful for you to understand the disease, to understand how your treatment is working or not working. And so that was kind of where, our early beginnings were. Very naturally, once kind of people understood the power of it in the rare diseases, people started experimenting it with chronic diseases, hypertension, asthma, COPD, so on and so forth. And we started getting traction. And then COVID hit, and COVID really kind of, forced everybody to do this, right?
Right.
It was like, I don't think from a digital health remote monitoring perspective, anybody could have orchestrated, such a, drama and such a need that, hey, you have to do remote patient monitoring. There's no way out for you. So that was kind of our history. And all we were doing was, monitoring patient vitals, guiding the patient through their treatment, meaning do this today, do this tomorrow, do this, the day after. In a very simple way, we were focused on, making sure the patient feels at ease. So we, made sure the patient has this guidance, but also has a connection point with our monitoring team, as well as a connection point with their, with their providers remotely. And we were doing really, really well. Now, this didn't require, kind of class 2 or 510K approval, because we were never kind of diagnosing anything.
Right.
We were not, we were not saying to patient, hey, do this. We were making no clinical decisions. We were just, following, our software was essentially following the script that was pre-written by a doctor, right? But then when, COVID hit, when we got a lot of traction, we said, what does the future look like, for digital first care, for this care outside the, four walls of a clinic? And we said that, platforms like us will have to do more of the diagnosis, will have to do more of, predictions. And we said that because, one, there was a need. If you look at COPD, there are lots of signs that a person is going to have a exacerbation attack 3 days, 4 days ahead of time, right? And when that happens, it's really bad. The patient has to go to ER. They have to take really heavy medications like steroids. It's expensive. It's bad for the patient. And over time, the patient stops responding to this, right? So there's all these incentives to prevent that from happening. So we started looking at, individual disease states. We started looking at what's kind of the next frontier for us. And we said we have to, our platform has to, get into diagnosis, the predictions, identifying at-risk patients early, identifying disease progression, recommending and supporting the clinicians in their decision making, because we also saw that most clinicians are understaffed by 20-30%. So they don't have kind of time. So we saw that our platform and technology has to play that role. And that's when we said that if we want to get into that space, then we have to follow the regulations. if you look at, class 2 means, a device or a software is, diagnosing something.
Right.
As soon as you are getting that, you need to get to class 2. You can't just be class 1.
Right.
And that's where we, said we're going to go for class 2, 510K here in FDA. And I think we took a very interesting approach by saying that we can go to FDA and we can say, look, you should approve us for, 510K for hypertension management. But we realized that, hey, because we started in rare diseases, we have seen so many permutations and combinations. We've started did about 10 to 11 rare diseases. Then we went into cardiovascular. Then we went into respiratory. We've seen a lot of permutations and combinations across all of our deployments. And the way we've built kind of the platform is, hey, we can configure anything and make it, safe, effective for cardiovascular, and we can configure the same thing and make it effective for asthma or respiratory. Why don't we go to the FDA and say that, hey, don't approve us for a particular disease state, approve us for a disease agnostic configurable platform.
Yep.
And our argument was, we've done unique deployments, and I think the number was somewhere in several hundred unique deployments. And we said, look, our configurable platform has proven safety and efficacy across these hundreds and hundreds of use cases. Here's the data that we can show you. So if there is a 401th use case, trust us that our processes and our infrastructure that we use to configure for a new use case will work. And so that's what we got the approval for. So tomorrow, if there is a new use case, and as long as we are using the same feature sets and same modules to configure and deliver a solution, we don't have to go back to FDA to get a new approval. If we come up with a new feature, right? Let's say, we come up with a new feature where we say, hey, based on your voice, we can detect, your cough, or we can detect bronchitis, or we can detect something else. That's a new feature, which doesn't exist in our platform today. For that, we will just go and, get that feature approved, right? So it's a lot shorter, regulatory pathway that we have. At the same time, we also said, because our platform is configurable, we also invested to make sure that, hey, we know we are a really great company and we really have an amazing talent, and we will, build new features and new products. But at the same time, we know that there are tons of other smart people out there as well who are also building, new features and new kind of, tools. And sometimes those guys might do a better job than us. An example is, there is a company who is using, the smartphone camera to measure heart rate and heart rate variability.
Yep.
And they have applied for FDA approval, so on and so forth. And so there we said, you know what, it doesn't make sense for us to, invest and do the same thing that company has done. That company has done a really great job. FDA is approving them, so on and so forth. So why don't we use their technology? As long as it is class 2, we can host it on our platform. And so that's kind of the configurable platform approach we have taken. And so when you start thinking about, AI and, predictive algorithms, we see a future where we're going to have, 500 different, AI and algorithms, or maybe 5,000, right? Clearly, Huma is not going to develop each and every one of them. But if we have, like in Europe, we have about 2 million, patients on our platform.
Mm-hmm.
And we are aspiring to the same number to start in the US. We are about 1.5 year old in the US. How do we make sure that these patients who are on our platform, the 2 million plus, get the best of the best every single time, right? And our approach was, hey, let's start integrating other technologies on our platform.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, let's start hosting these technologies on our platform so that the patients, get the best of the best. So that's our approach. It's taken a lot. I think you asked me a question about, what is the regulatory process? It's a long process, especially when you are kind of, approaching FDA with a different kind of, value proposition.
Mm-hmm.
But we felt like, the upfront investment was necessary and was justified, because now we are at a place where, we can bring speedy innovation to the market because the way we are structured from a regulatory perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the obviously once again the agnostic sort of nature of it has really shown the benefit in the sense that your use cases, which we'll be getting into, are quite diverse, and so that's exciting that you succeeded in this context and are doing executing on these different models, and I would love if as the next step is so we could analyze some of these use cases. I think a really fun place to start, just because it is such a hot topic nowadays, is this whole area of real world evidence and the decentralized clinical trial, because this is clearly, as you were mentioning, COVID hit, major use cases for these tools. You've publicly announced a couple relationships and programs with AstraZeneca in the area of their vaccine trials, and some COPD work, which really allowed you to gather up very large patient populations that, much more than typical, but at the same time, an important piece of this is, this whole concept of sort of clinical research equity, where, traditional processes of triaging where we get our patients from, we usually leave a lot of people behind. Real world evidence, decentralization allows us to go much broader. Talk a little bit about decentralized clinical trials, real world evidence, and a little bit of what's going on here. I think it's really important.
Yeah, I think, I'll be honest. I think a couple of years ago, I think I and the rest of the industry was quite excited about, the decentralized clinical trial. Yeah. Precisely for all the potential that you described in terms of making sure our research has a diverse enough representation. I think the challenge with and that is still true. Let me not just directly jump into the challenge first. It is still true. Our technology is being used in various cases where we are essentially removing the need for a participant to be closely located to a large academic center, right? And when we do that, we are very happy that we are achieving the precise goal that you just said about diversity in research. But I think we are beholden still on when we can do it and to what extent we can do it, on the study design, on the research centers or the research locus points are still around academic centers, right? If you and I go outside and say, where are the biggest and brightest researchers across the disease states, they will very likely be largely around the academic centers, because that is where research is happening. That is where literature is being published. That is where experiments are done. And as such, it's a very natural that, the clinical trials will also happen there, because that's where our mind and brains are. Best of the minds and brains are. So that is still kind of, a little bit of limiting factor.
Sure.
But I'm not discouraged by that, because where we see a bigger opportunity is the second piece you mentioned, on the real world evidence side.
Yeah.
There we are seeing a lot of interest, as well as a lot of potential to drive diversity. And where I think we have focused on, we'll probably announce a partnership with one of the biggest medtech company in the globe, precisely to drive their post-market. They call it registry, but essentially it's post-launch market studies on their products, right? And the reason we see a huge potential is because once you launch, people across US, rural America, people across the globe are using that technology, whether in community hospitals, whether in and when I say technology, I'm referring to drugs or medical devices and therapies. And today there is very little done on post-market real world evidence gathering. Part of the reason is because it's really expensive to go get that data, and logistically it's very, very challenging. So that is where we get super excited, because we jump in and we say, we can solve this problem. We have solved this problem in other kind of cases. Let us solve this problem, and let us help you improve your registry compliance rates, help you increase your size of registry and real world data. Let us help you increase the length of your study, so on and so forth. So there we definitely kind of see a huge potential. Now, of course, our hope is that real world evidence gets back into research and drives adjustments. We'll have to see that of how that happens.
And based on, well, it could be again connected to either the real world evidence or just the regular world evidence that you are able to connect through these systems. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, a major part of obviously crunching and learning and generating insights. Talk a little bit, because I know here again, some of the things, you recently did a collaboration with Google. You have something going on with Bayer and the UK Biobank, asthma sort of prediction, cardiovascular disease risk. Talk a little bit about how AI, machine learning, sort of is an indispensable tool, especially in the context of something like the Huma's core technology.
Yeah, we so I look at it, from three kind of large areas where we are using AI, and the reason for these three large areas is because there's a risk appetite, there's a dollar potential, and logistically how challenging it is. Differs in these three areas. All three areas are important, but we think that some areas will see more traction or faster traction. So the first one is all the back office work that is required, and we call it as how can we make our nurses 10x, right? How can we make today's nurse a super nurse? Right. And so if you ask that question, you will start kind of looking at, what does our nurse spending time on, right? What are physicians spending time on? And there's a lot of time on documentation and administrative tasks. Either helping, the patients administratively, or just, documenting and, forwarding and, sharing it with other, providers, so on and so forth. And I think that is where, some of the large language models, AI, can help significantly. We've already started experimenting with things like that, where, our internal nurses, use some of these tools. Now, we don't use these tools and directly send anything to the patient. There's always a, nurse oversight between the two. But that's, you can imagine that's a safe environment to work, right?
Sure.
I have a manual oversight to make sure there's no mistakes, there's no, we're not communicating anything, wrong to the providers or the patients. But there's the big kind of usage. We hope, we can reduce the administrative tasks significantly. Not just for my clinical team, but also, our customers' kind of clinical team. The second area is around, prediction, or call it diagnosis. So we are working on predicting, a COPD attack, an asthma attack. We have already worked using the UK Biobank data. We have worked on a CVD risk score, which is again another predictive tool. You go through simple, surveys, we collect simple data, and based on, your demographics, based on, your questions and other kind of information, we can predict, what's your risk for a cardiovascular risk score over the next 5 years and 10 years, right? And based on that, that's a great tool, right? For, talk about, preventative medicine, talk about proactive healthcare. That's a huge, great tool. So that is what we are working with Bayer. We have that tool. What we are now working on is great. We have screened, millions of patients, and we have identified these, few 100,000 who are at high risk. What do we do with them, right? Like if we don't change their trajectory, then we haven't done anything good. So right now we are working on how do we change their trajectory? How do we get them in front of, a cardiologist or a physician? How do we put them on a program, and how do we actually make a dent in their life, right? Change their course so that, their risk is reduced. So that's another example of, AI. And then I think the third bucket, which we think, also has potential, is, having an AI who delivers, care. I think that is a little bit, high risk. I think, if I start talking about this among 10 physicians, they will kind of say, hold on a second, that's kind of my job. How can you prove to me that, the AI would do as good or better job than I do? Because there is, personal judgment and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of regulatory, work that needs to happen. I don't think FDA has figured out a position on how to regulate that yet. Recently, I think FDA announced a advisory board for digital health and digital medicine. So hoping that we can work closely with this advisory board to figure out what the regulatory landscape would look like. What would innovators like us have to do and prove before we can put some innovation in front of anybody. But that has very high potential, but at the same time very high risk as well. So it'll take time for us to see some meaningful innovation in that bucket. But that's how we at Huma see that. We invest our time across all these three, but again in proportionate way, to make sure that we are bringing something to the market.
Kaushik, in the beginning of the show, in your bio, I mentioned, part of the tagline for the company is helping people live longer, fuller lives, and this theme of health span slash lifespan has also been one that's heated up a lot in recent years and has been a really interesting topic for us on the show. One of your, again, coming back to the whole concept of digital first, and specifically, the broad health system for Huma is this concept of hospital at home. And this is whether we're talking hospital at home, the smart home, healthcare at home, it all comes back to sort of this aging in place theme, which we've seen not just healthcare companies, but we've had guests from General Electric, from Best Buy. This is something a lot of companies are realizing the hardware potential for. You're bringing the software. Talk a little bit about this, because I think this is obviously many important use cases, but this is an extremely important one, especially with the aging of our population, not just here in the United States, but every country around the world.
Yeah. I think so. Where we have focused a lot is in the two places where, if you have a disease, a chronic disease especially, which a lot of our aging population have, let's make sure we support you through technology to manage that, so that the next time you go see your cardiovascular, cardiologist, there is an improvement in your, hypertension, or there's an improvement in your, overall cardiovascular risk. That we are seeing a lot of traction. We are seeing a lot of use case that, traditionally is not called as hospital at home because the person was not admitted, right? But the person has a serious condition. Very likely, this person is, may go to the hospital 2 or 3 times a year, right? Like the frequent flyer to the hospital. Let's do a good job so that we can keep the person outside the hospital. Let's do even better job and actually improve the person's, health score, if you will. The second area where we have done a lot of work is actually, going upstream, and focusing on diagnosis. So if you look at, cancer diagnosis or cancer screening, it's abysmally low. Right? We all know cancer is really bad, but for some reason, human race is not doing the level of cancer screening required.
Yeah.
So we have a technology that does, simple digital screening, digital, diagnostics. And, a lot of the UK uses that technology. And so we believe that these two will play a big role in, making sure that, our old population, we catch the disease early, and we start intervening early, and we start measuring, the improvement in their health early. And if that is not happening, we react kind of quickly. So that's where, most of Huma's focus has been. We do a little bit of work as because the result of our work, because we do a lot of work with pulmonologists, with cardiologists. They are typically associated with hospitals. Their patients typically go to the hospitals, at least their frequent flyer, really sick patients go to the hospital several times. So as a result, we do work with a few hospitals where, the game is a little bit different in the sense that, once you are discharged from the hospital, you send bunch of devices at the patient's home. And you start measuring, you start using those devices to measure the person's vitals and what have you, to make sure the person doesn't come back within 30 days to the hospital. I think there the device players have a bigger role to play. We do play a role, but certainly our role is more of a extension. Okay, what do you do after the 30 days? Now you've avoided the 30-day readmission rate, but what do you do? That's when I think our solution, which by the way, being a software led, we are a lot low cost, lot scalable platform or solution. So our kind of solution, or the way we think about our solution, is like we stick with the patient for much longer time, not just like 30 days after a acute event.
Kaushik, what else is coming up? I mean, I noticed the last couple months you've been pretty active on the conference scene, discussing AI and digital health and distributed clinical trials and things like this. What else is happening for the rest of the year as we get ready to get into 2024? Anything hot public facing that's coming up that we should know about? Scoops? Any other conferences or meetings that we should be looking for to run into you and meet you? Anything else while we have you, please?
No, I think AI is certainly the new buzzword. I think what you will hear more and more from me and the Huma team is that I don't think a lot of other people are talking about, is this whole concept of scale.
Okay.
Right. If you look around, I don't think any other company out there in the world has 2 million, active users on their platform.
Right.
I think Omada recently, if I'm not mistaken, declared that they got to, million, registered users, not like active users. And so I think, right now the challenge in front of the entire industry is scale.
Yeah.
And if we don't solve that issue in the next 2 to 3 years, and meaning, few of the digital players get to that, scale, or few, and I say few because you can't have like just one company getting to scale. You need like, 5, 10 companies getting to scale. We'll be in a serious problem, because the big promise of digital is scale. Right? Scale at low cost, for all the patients. And so I think we've seen decent amount of clinical outcomes, impact on clinical outcomes. There's tons of publications out there, but we haven't seen decent examples of scale, right? Clinical outcomes at scale. That's what I'm focused on. That's what the team here at Huma is focused on. I think you'll start seeing the industry quickly start focusing on that. A little bit also because of I think capital has dried out. So as such, investors are also focusing on profitability, revenue, kind of core financial metrics. And so all companies will have to deliver a scale to satisfy that.
Well, it's been a really interesting story, and again, watching from a distance that you sort of evolved this model, and just rooting you on, because I think you are in definitely the right spot to deliver in not just as you mentioned, not just clinical research, patient care, distributed patient care, just in the right place, and just I'm going to look forward to continue to watch the evolution of the company. Hopefully we can have you back on next year to do some updates on. I'm sure you have a bunch more deals even then. But again, for everyone that is going to be listening to this episode of the show across the various podcast networks, or watching on the YouTube channel, again, you've been listening to Kaushik Gune, Head of Healthcare for the United States for Huma, doing really amazing things with digital health and their digital first care delivery and research system to help people live longer, fuller lives. Kaushik, I want to thank you for taking the time, getting up so early to come talk to us for a little while today on these topics. Obviously, thank you for everything you're doing there at the company. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for millions of people out there via what you're doing. Really very inspiring story.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on the show, and thank you for listening to my thoughts. Hopefully they spark some inspiration and ideas in people listening. So looking forward to doing great things together.
Most definitely. It's great having you.